The beam had fallen so fast that Grace Hartley didn't even have time to scream before the weight pinned her legs to the floor of the burning barn, trapping her in a nightmare of smoke and crackling flames that licked at the wooden walls around her. She could feel the heat intensifying with each passing second, could smell her own hair beginning to singe as she struggled uselessly against the massive timber that had her caught like an animal in a trap. Her hands were already blistered from trying to push it off, her voice hoarse from calling for help that she was certain would never come. The ranch sat too far from town, too isolated on the Kansas plains for anyone to hear her cries or see the smoke rising into the late afternoon sky. She was going to die here, alone, and the thought made her want to weep, except that she needed every bit of strength just to keep breathing through the thickening smoke. Then she heard boots pounding across the dirt outside, heavy and fast, and a man's voice shouting something she couldn't quite make out through the roar of the fire. The barn door, already half consumed by flames, crashed inward as a figure burst through the wall of heat and smoke. Grace could barely see him through her watering eyes, but she could make out his silhouette against the orange glow, tall and broad-shouldered, moving toward her with purpose. He dropped to his knees beside her, and she got her first clear look at his face, streaked with soot and sweat, his blue eyes startlingly bright against the dirt. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and a jaw set with determination. "Hold on," he said, his voice rough but steady. He didn't waste time asking how she had gotten trapped or telling her everything would be fine. He simply positioned himself at the beam, planted his boots firmly against the floorboards, and began to lift. Grace watched the muscles in his arms strain beneath his shirt, saw the tendons in his neck stand out with effort as he fought against the weight of the timber. For a moment, nothing happened, and she felt despair wash over her again. Then, impossibly, the beam began to rise. Inch by excruciating inch, he lifted it, his face contorted with effort, until there was enough space for her to pull herself free. Grace didn't hesitate. She dragged herself backward, ignoring the screaming pain in her legs, and as soon as she was clear, the cowboy let the beam drop with a thunderous crash that sent up a shower of sparks. He grabbed her under the arms and hauled her to her feet, or tried to. The moment her right leg took any weight, it buckled beneath her, and she would have collapsed if he hadn't caught her. "I've got you," he said, and then he was lifting her, one arm beneath her knees and the other supporting her back, cradling her against his chest as he turned toward the exit. The barn was collapsing around them now, beams falling like dominoes, the air so hot it felt like breathing in fire. Grace buried her face against his shoulder and held on as he ran, feeling his heart pounding against her cheek, feeling the power in his stride as he carried her through the inferno and out into the blessed coolness of the open air. He didn't stop until they were a safe distance from the barn, far enough that the heat was no longer oppressive. Only then did he set her down gently in the grass, kneeling beside her as she gasped for breath, coughing up the smoke that had filled her lungs. He was coughing too, but his attention was focused entirely on her, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders with surprising gentleness, checking for injuries. "Where are you hurt?" he asked, and when she just shook her head, unable to speak yet, he continued his examination. His hands stilled when they reached her right leg, and his expression darkened. Even through her torn skirt, Grace could see the swelling beginning, could feel the pain radiating from her ankle up through her shin. "Your leg is broken," he said, looking up at her face. "What else is broken here?" The question caught her off guard. There was something in the way he asked it, in the way he was looking at her, that made her think he wasn't just asking about her physical injuries. Grace met his eyes and found herself unable to look away. "I do not know," she whispered. Everything, maybe. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he had already suspected. Behind them, the barn gave one final groan before the roof caved in completely, sending up a pillar of smoke and embers that rose into the darkening sky. Grace watched it burn and felt something inside her chest crack open. That barn had been her father's pride and joy. He had built it with his own hands 30 years ago, back when he first claimed this land and started the ranch that was supposed to be their legacy. Now he was 6 months in the ground, dead from a fever that had swept through Leavenworth last winter, and her brother Thomas had been killed just 3 weeks ago when his horse threw him during a storm. The ranch was hers now, all hers, and she had no idea how to run it alone. She had been in the barn trying to move hay bales, trying to do the work that Thomas would have done when the lamp had fallen and started the fire. It was her fault. All of this was her fault. "My name is Cole Foster," the cowboy said, pulling her attention back to him. "I was riding past and saw the smoke. Is anyone else here? Anyone else who might have been in the barn?" Grace shook her head. "Just me. I am Grace Hartley. This is my ranch, or it was." She looked at the burning barn again and felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not know what it is anymore." Cole followed her gaze, his expression grim. "The barn can be rebuilt. You are alive. That is what matters." He turned back to her and very carefully lifted her skirt just enough to examine her leg properly. Grace felt her face flush, but he was completely professional, his touch impersonal as he assessed the damage. "The bone might be fractured, or it could just be a bad sprain. Either way, you need a doctor. Is there anyone I can fetch for you? Family, neighbors?" "No family left," Grace said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "My father died last winter. My brother died 3 weeks ago. It is just me now." She paused, then added, "There is a doctor in Leavenworth about 8 miles east of here, Dr. Morrison." Cole nodded. "Too far for you to ride, and I am not leaving you here alone. I will take you to town myself." He stood and walked over to where a magnificent chestnut horse was waiting, ground-tied and eyeing the burning barn nervously. Cole stroked the animal's neck, murmuring something Grace couldn't hear, then led the horse over to where she sat. "This is Copper. He is steady and he will not mind carrying double. I am going to lift you up onto him and then I will climb up behind you. It will hurt, but it is the only way." Grace nodded, bracing herself. Cole bent down and lifted her again, this time setting her carefully on the saddle. The movement jostled her injured leg and she bit back a cry, gripping the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands. True to his word, Cole swung up behind her a moment later, one arm coming around her waist to hold her secure against his chest. She could feel the solid warmth of him at her back, could smell smoke and sweat and something else, something clean and masculine that made her acutely aware of how close they were. "Lean back against me," he said quietly. "I have got you." Grace did as he instructed, too exhausted and in too much pain to protest. Cole clicked his tongue and Copper started forward at an easy walk, carefully picking his way around the burning barn and out toward the main road. Grace watched her ranch disappear behind them as they rode, watched the smoke column grow smaller, and felt as if she was leaving behind more than just a building. She was leaving behind the last remnants of the life she had known, the life where she had been someone's daughter, someone's sister, part of something larger than herself. "How long have you been trying to run the ranch alone?" Cole asked after they had been riding for several minutes in silence. Grace wasn't sure how he knew that was what she had been doing, but she saw no point in lying. 3 weeks, since Thomas died. Before that, we were managing together, but barely. We lost most of our hands over the winter. They left when Father died because Thomas could not afford to pay them what they were owed, It was just the two of us trying to do the work of 10 men. She paused, then continued, I should have asked for help. I should have sold the place while I still could. But I kept thinking I could make it work somehow. I kept thinking I could hold on to it for them, for Father and Thomas, but I cannot do it. I am not strong enough. You were trapped under a burning beam and you did not panic, Cole said. His voice was matter of fact, but there was an undertone of something that might have been respect. You pulled yourself free the moment I lifted it off you, even with a broken leg. That takes strength. That is different, Grace said. That is just survival. Running a ranch takes knowledge and skill and physical power that I do not have. I do not know how to brand cattle or break horses or negotiate prices with buyers. I can cook and sew and keep a house, but that is not enough out here. Those are valuable skills too, Cole said. They had reached the main road now, and he urged Copper into a faster walk. The sun was setting, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Grace had been in any state to appreciate them. But you are right that ranching takes more than one person can give, especially someone who was not raised to it. What will you do now? Grace had been asking herself the same question for 3 weeks, and she still did not have an answer. I suppose I will have to sell what is left. The land is still worth something, and we have about 60 head of cattle, though I have not been able to do a proper count recently. Maybe that will be enough to start over somewhere, do something different with my life. The thought made her chest tighten with grief and guilt, but what choice did she have? She could not run the ranch alone, and there was no one to help her. She had no other family, and the neighbors who might have assisted her were struggling with their own problems. This was 1881 in Kansas, and times were hard for everyone. Cole was quiet for a moment, and Grace wondered what he was thinking. She knew nothing about this man, except that he had risked his life to save hers, and that he was strong enough to lift a beam that should have required 2 or 3 men to move. He had appeared out of nowhere like something from a dime novel, and now he was taking her to town out of pure decency. She would probably never see him again after tonight, and that thought produced a strange, hollow feeling in her stomach that she told herself was just shock and exhaustion. I am a ranch hand, Cole said finally, or I was. I have been working cattle since I was 14 years old, learned the trade from my father in Texas before he passed. I came north looking for work about a year ago, been drifting from place to place, taking jobs where I could find them. My last position was at the Crawford Ranch about 20 miles west of here. The owner died 2 months ago and his widow sold the place, so I have been riding through looking for my next job. He paused, and Grace felt him shift slightly behind her. I could help you if you wanted. I could teach you what you need to know, help you get the ranch back on its feet, in exchange for room and board and a fair wage when you are able to pay it. Grace twisted around to look at him, ignoring the stab of pain the movement caused. You do not even know me. Why would you offer to do that? Cole met her eyes steadily. I know you are trying to hold onto something that matters to you. I know you are brave enough to keep fighting even when everything seems lost. That is enough for me. His expression softened slightly. And maybe I am tired of drifting. Maybe I am ready to stay in one place for a while, work toward something that lasts. Grace wanted to accept immediately, wanted to grab onto this lifeline he was offering with both hands, but she forced herself to think practically. I cannot pay you anything right now. We have almost no money left. I have been living on what Thomas and I saved, and that is nearly gone. It could be months before the ranch turns any kind of profit if it ever does. Then, we will make it work somehow, Cole said simply. I have enough saved to cover my own expenses for a while. And I would rather work for the possibility of future payment than collect wages from someone who does not need my help. He smiled slightly, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and less serious. "Besides, you owe me your life. I think a job is a fair trade." Despite everything, Grace felt herself smile back. "That seems like an unequal bargain. My life must be worth more than room and board." "Much more," Cole agreed, his voice dropping to something warmer, something that made her pulse skip. "But we can start there and see where it leads." They rode the rest of the way to Leavenworth in comfortable silence, Grace's mind racing with possibilities. If Cole was serious, if he really would stay and help her, then maybe she did not have to sell the ranch after all. Maybe she could learn what she needed to know, could become strong enough to make this work. The thought filled her with a fragile hope that she was afraid to trust, but could not quite suppress. Leavenworth was a bustling frontier town, larger than most in Kansas, with a population of several thousand. It had been established back in 1854 and had grown steadily over the years, becoming an important stop on various trade routes. The main street was lined with businesses, their windows glowing with lamplight as darkness fell. Cole guided Copper directly to the doctor's office, which was attached to a small house on the edge of town. He dismounted first, then lifted Grace down with the same careful gentleness he had shown before, carrying her up the steps to the front door. Dr. Morrison answered Cole's knock, a stout man in his 50s with graying hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He took one look at Grace and ushered them inside immediately, directing Cole to lay her on the examination table in his surgery. The doctor worked efficiently, cutting away Grace's stocking to expose her injured leg, probing carefully at the swollen ankle while Grace bit her lip against the pain. "It is a bad sprain, not a break," Dr. Morrison pronounced after several minutes. "You are lucky, Miss Hartley. Another few inches and that beam might have shattered the bone. As it is, you will need to stay off this leg for at least 2 weeks, keep it elevated and iced. I will wrap it for you, but you must promise me you will rest. No trying to work, no putting weight on it before it is ready." Grace opened her mouth to protest that she could not afford to rest for 2 weeks, but Cole spoke first. "She will rest. I will make sure of it." Dr. Morrison looked between them with raised eyebrows. "And who might you be, young man?" "Cole Foster. I am working at Miss Hartley's ranch now." Cole said it with such confidence that the doctor simply nodded and went back to wrapping Grace's ankle with strips of clean linen. Grace said nothing to contradict him, and tried not to think about how natural it had sounded, how right, to hear Cole speak as if he belonged at her ranch. The doctor finished his work and gave Grace a small bottle of laudanum for the pain, along with strict instructions about caring for her injury. Cole paid the doctor's fee from his own pocket before Grace could object, then carried her back out to where Copper was waiting. "There is a hotel just down the street," he said. "You should stay there tonight. In the morning I will go back to your ranch and see what can be salvaged, make sure the fire is completely out." "I should go with you," Grace said, even though the thought of climbing back on a horse made her want to weep. "You should rest, like the doctor said." Cole's tone was firm but not unkind. "Trust me to handle this. I will come back tomorrow and tell you everything, and we can make plans from there." Grace wanted to argue, but she was so tired, and her leg was throbbing despite the bandaging. She nodded reluctantly, and Cole took her to the Leavenworth Hotel, a respectable establishment in the center of town. He paid for a room for her, ignoring her protests, and carried her upstairs to a small but clean chamber with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. "Get some rest," he said, setting her down gently on the bed. "I will be back in the morning." "Cole," Grace said as he turned to leave. He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you." He smiled that transforming smile again. Like I said, we will figure it out." Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, and Grace was alone with her thoughts and the fading light of day. She did not remember falling asleep, but when she woke, pale morning sunlight was streaming through the window and someone was knocking on her door. Grace struggled to sit up, wincing at the stiffness in her body and the dull ache in her leg. "Come in," she called, and the door opened to reveal Cole, looking fresher than he had any right to after what must have been a long night. He was carrying a tray with breakfast, bread and eggs and coffee, and the smell made Grace's stomach growl with sudden hunger. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the small table beside the bed. "How is your leg this morning?" "Sore but bearable," Grace said. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Did you go back to the ranch?" Cole nodded, pulling a chair over and sitting down. "I rode out at first light. The barn is a total loss, nothing left but the foundation and some charred beams, but the fire did not spread. Your house is fine and the outbuildings are all intact. I checked on your cattle too. I found 53 head in the east pasture, all healthy. There might be more scattered around the property, but that is a decent start." Grace felt relief wash over her. She had been terrified that the fire might have spread to the house, might have destroyed everything. "That is better than I hoped for. Thank you for checking." "I did a quick inventory of your supplies too," Cole continued. "You are low on feed for the livestock and you will need to restock your food stores soon, but the essentials are there. The house is sound, the well is good, and the land itself is prime grazing territory." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Grace, you have the foundation of a good ranch here. It is going to take work to build it back up, but it can be done. If you are willing to try, I am willing to help you." Grace looked at him, this man who had saved her life and was now offering to save her livelihood as well. She barely knew him, had no guarantee that he would keep his word, or that he was even who he claimed to be. For all she knew, he could be a drifter planning to rob her blind the moment she let her guard down. But something in her gut told her to trust him, told her that Cole Foster was exactly what he appeared to be. A good man who had seen someone in trouble and decided to help. "I am willing to try," she said quietly. "More than willing, but I need you to understand what you are agreeing to. This will not be easy. We will be working from dawn to dusk every day, and there is no guarantee it will pay off. You could spend months helping me rebuild only to watch it all fail anyway." "I understand," Cole said. "I have worked failing ranches before. I know the risks." He smiled slightly. "But I have a good feeling about this one. About you." The way he said it made Grace's heart do something strange in her chest. She covered the moment by taking a sip of coffee and reaching for the food he had brought. They ate together in companionable silence, and then Cole helped her downstairs and onto Copper for the ride back to the ranch. Grace's leg protested the movement, but the laudanum the doctor had given her took the edge off the pain. The ride back took longer than the ride into town had seemed to take, probably because Grace was more aware of everything now, more conscious of Cole's arm around her waist, of the way his chest moved against her back with each breath he took. She found herself memorizing details about him. The calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way he spoke to Copper with the same gentle firmness he had used with her. By the time they reached the ranch, Grace was achingly aware that she was attracted to him, and equally aware that she could not afford to be. She needed Cole's help, needed his expertise and his muscle, and she could not risk complicating things with feelings that might not be returned. Cole carried her into the house, which was exactly as she had left it the day before. Dishes in the sink, unmade bed, everything slightly dusty because she had been too busy trying to keep the ranch running to worry about housekeeping. She felt embarrassed for him to see it, but he did not seem to notice or care. He settled her in a chair by the window with her leg propped up on a cushioned stool, then looked around appraisingly. "I will bunk in the foreman's cabin if that suits you," he said. "It will need some cleaning out, but it should be habitable." "Of course," Grace said quickly. The foreman's cabin was a small structure about 50 yards from the main house, built for the man who used to oversee the ranch hands before her father's death. It had been empty since last winter. "There should be a bed frame and a stove in there still, but you will need bedding and supplies. I can show you where everything is stored." "You will stay right where you are," Cole said firmly. "Just tell me where to look." Grace directed him to the linen closet and watched through the window as he made several trips back and forth to the cabin, carrying blankets and cooking equipment. He moved with easy efficiency, never seeming hurried but accomplishing everything quickly nonetheless. When he returned to the main house, he started a fire in the stove and put on water for tea, moving around Grace's kitchen as if he had every right to be there. "You do not have to wait on me," Grace protested. "I can manage." "I know you can," Cole said. "But the doctor said you need to rest, and I agreed to make sure you do. So you are going to sit there with your leg up and let me handle things for the next few days." He found bread and butter and made sandwiches for their lunch, serving Grace before taking his own portion. "While you rest, I want you to tell me everything about this ranch. How much land you have, where your property lines are, what kind of cattle you are running, what your usual schedule would be for this time of year. I need to understand the full scope of what we are dealing with." So Grace told him. The ranch was 320 acres, a quarter section that her father had claimed through the Homestead Act back in 1862. It was good land, well watered with a creek running through the north portion and several natural springs scattered across the property. They ran Hereford cattle primarily, good beef stock that did well in the Kansas climate. Under her father's management, the ranch had supported a herd of nearly 200 head, but losses over the past year had reduced that number by more than half. "We should have been branding the new calves this spring," Grace said, "and rounding up any strays that wandered off over the winter. The cattle need to be moved to fresh grazing every few weeks, and we should be cutting hay now for winter feed. There are probably repairs needed on the fences, and we should check the water sources to make sure they have not dried up." She paused, feeling overwhelmed just thinking about all the work that needed doing. "I do not even know where to start." "We start with the basics," Cole said calmly. "First, we make sure the cattle are safe and healthy. Then we assess what repairs are most urgent. Everything else can wait until we have those fundamentals covered." He studied her thoughtfully. "Do you ride?" Grace nodded. "I have been riding since I was a child." "My horse is in the stable, a mare named Misty." "Good. Once your leg heals, you will need to ride with me so you can learn to work cattle properly. But for now, I will handle the riding and you can handle the planning. I want you to make a list of everything you know needs doing, in order of priority. We will work through it systematically." It felt good to have a plan, to have someone taking charge who actually knew what they were doing. Grace spent the afternoon making lists, while Cole unpacked his belongings in the foreman's cabin, and then went out to check on the cattle more thoroughly. He came back at sunset with news that he had found another 8 head in the south pasture, bringing their total to 61. "I will do a complete inventory over the next few days," he said. "But that is a solid starting number. With good management, we can rebuild the herd to 100 head within 2 years, maybe more." 2 years. Grace tried to imagine it, tried to picture herself still here on the ranch in 2 years, tried to picture Cole still here too. She found that she liked the image more than she should and pushed the thought away firmly. They fell into a routine over the following days. Cole would wake before dawn and do the morning chores, feeding the chickens and the horses, checking on the cattle. He would come in for breakfast and they would eat together, discussing the day's work. Then Cole would head out to tackle whatever was most urgent while Grace, still confined to her chair, would handle what she could from inside. Mending clothes, planning meals, going over the ranch accounts to see exactly how bad their financial situation was. Cole would return for lunch, and they would talk more about the ranch, about their plans, about their pasts. Grace learned that Cole had grown up in Texas, that his father had been a ranch hand who taught him everything he knew before dying in a stampede when Cole was 18. His mother had passed when he was young, and he had no siblings. He had been on his own for 8 years, working his way north through various ranches, never staying in one place long because he had never found a reason to settle. "What made you decide to stop here?" Grace asked one afternoon. It was her 4th day of recovery, and she was starting to feel restless and useless despite Cole's insistence that she was healing well. Cole was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. They were sitting on the porch, Grace in her chair with her leg propped up, Cole on the steps whittling a piece of wood into some shape she could not yet identify. "Honestly, I do not know. I have ridden past a dozen burning barns in my life, and I always assumed someone else would handle it or that it was already too late to help. But when I saw your barn burning, something made me turn around. Something told me I needed to be here." He looked up at her, his blue eyes serious. "I am glad I listened to that instinct." "So am I," Grace said softly. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something she did not want to name. She cleared her throat and changed the subject. "What are you making?" Cole smiled and held up the piece of wood. It was beginning to take the shape of a horse, rough still but recognizable. "Just something to keep my hands busy. I used to do this a lot when I was younger. My father taught me. He said it was good to have a skill that did not involve ropes and cattle, something peaceful." "It is lovely," Grace said and meant it. There was something touching about this strong, capable man sitting on her porch and creating something delicate and artistic. "Will you teach me sometime?" "If you want to learn," Cole said. "But first, you need to heal. How is your leg feeling today?" "Better," Grace admitted. "Stronger. I think I could probably walk on it if I had to." "The doctor said 2 weeks," Cole reminded her. "We are only at day 4. Be patient." Grace sighed but nodded. She knew he was right, but patience had never been her strong suit. She watched Cole work on his carving and tried not to think about how comfortable this felt, how natural, sitting here with him as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant colors. She tried not to think about how much she looked forward to his company, to their conversations, to the sound of his voice and the sight of his smile. She tried not to think about the fact that she was falling for him, hard and fast and completely against her better judgment. By the end of the first week, Grace was allowed to walk with a cane, as long as she took it easy and did not put too much strain on her healing ankle. She felt like a prisoner given parole, so relieved to be mobile again that she nearly wept. Cole fashioned her a sturdy walking stick from a piece of oak and insisted on accompanying her on her first venture out to see the ranch properly. The burned barn was a sobering sight, a blackened skeleton against the green prairie. But the rest of the ranch looked better than Grace had dared hope. Cole had been busy, repairing fences and clearing brush, and generally making the place look cared for again. The cattle were healthy and well tended, the horses groomed and content. It was clear that Cole knew exactly what he was doing. "You have done so much already," Grace said, leaning on her walking stick and looking around. I do not know how I can ever thank you properly. You are letting me stay, giving me a purpose, Cole said. That is thanks enough. He paused, then added, besides, I like it here. I like the work. I like this place. He did not say that he liked her too, but something in his expression implied it, and Grace felt her heart skip. They walked together in the cool morning air, Grace moving slowly because of her leg but determined to see everything. Cole showed her where he had repaired the east fence, where he had found evidence of a coyote prowling near the herd, where he thought they should dig a new stock pond come fall. He talked to her like an equal, asked her opinions, listened when she offered suggestions. It was different from how Thomas had been, or even her father. They had both loved her but had never really considered her a partner in running the ranch. Cole was different. He made her feel capable, valued, intelligent. I want to learn to do what you do, Grace said as they walked back toward the house. I want to be able to ride out and manage the herd myself, not just watch from the sidelines. Then I will teach you, Cole promised. As soon as your leg is fully healed, we will start your education. But I warn you, it is hard work. Dirty, exhausting, sometimes dangerous work. I am not afraid of hard work, Grace said. I've been doing hard work my whole life, just different kinds. I can learn this too. Cole smiled at her, and there was something warm and proud in his expression. I believe you can. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Grace Hartley. The compliment made her flush with pleasure, and she had to look away to hide her reaction. They returned to the house, and Grace made lunch while Cole cleaned up from the morning's work. They ate together on the porch, enjoying the mild weather and the view of the prairie stretching out endlessly in all directions. I have been thinking about the finances, Grace said as they finished their meal. We need to start generating income soon. We cannot live on savings forever, especially since we have almost none left. When would be the best time to sell some cattle? Cole considered. Fall would be ideal. Buyers come through looking for beef stock to ship east. Prices are usually best in late September or early October. But that is still 4 months away, and I know you need money before then. He frowned thoughtfully. We could sell a few head now to get some cash, but we would not get as good a price and it would reduce our breeding stock. What if we did both? Grace suggested. Sell just enough now to cover our immediate needs and keep the rest for fall. That could work, Cole agreed. We would need to sort the herd carefully, pick out the animals that are not breeding quality or the steers that are ready for market. It will take some time, but it is doable. He looked at her appraisingly. You have a good head for business, Grace. Did your father teach you? Some, Grace said. But mostly I learned by watching him, by listening when he talked to buyers or other ranchers. He did not really believe women needed to know these things, but I was curious, so I paid attention. She smiled slightly. It used to drive Thomas crazy. He thought I should focus on more ladylike pursuits. Thomas was an idiot, Cole said bluntly, and Grace laughed despite herself. It felt good to laugh. Felt good to talk about her brother without the crushing weight of grief that usually accompanied his memory. You are smart and capable, and you should use those gifts however you see fit. The world needs more women like you, Grace. Women who are not afraid to be themselves. Grace felt something warm bloom in her chest at his words. She had spent most of her life being told to be quieter, gentler, more demure. It was intoxicating to be with someone who appreciated her exactly as she was, who saw her strength as an asset rather than a flaw. Over the next week, Grace's leg continued to heal and she grew stronger and more mobile. Cole began teaching her the finer points of ranch work, starting with how to properly care for the horses. Grace was a competent rider, but she had never learned how to groom a horse properly, how to check for injuries or signs of illness, how to maintain tack and equipment. Cole was a patient teacher, showing her each task multiple times and answering her endless questions without ever seeming annoyed. "You are a natural," he said one morning as she successfully saddled Misty without assistance. "Another few weeks and you will be ready to start learning to work cattle." "I can hardly wait," Grace said, and meant it. She was eager to be truly useful, to be a full partner in running the ranch rather than a liability that Cole had to work around. They spent more and more time together as the days passed, and Grace found herself growing increasingly attached to him. She loved the way he spoke to the animals, gentle and respectful. She loved his work ethic, the way he never complained even when he was clearly exhausted. She loved his sense of humor, dry and understated but genuinely funny. She loved the way he looked at her sometimes, as if she was the most fascinating thing he had ever seen. She was falling in love with him. She realized one evening as they sat on the porch together watching the stars come out. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it felt right, inevitable, like something that had been building since the moment he lifted that beam off her and carried her to safety. She had no idea if he felt the same way, but she was beginning to suspect he might. There were moments when she would catch him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, moments when his hand would linger on hers just a fraction too long, moments when the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. 2 weeks after the fire, Cole announced that it was time to round up the cattle and sort them for sale. Grace's leg was healed enough that the doctor had cleared her to ride, and she was determined to help. Cole was hesitant at first, worried about her pushing herself too hard too fast, but Grace insisted, and eventually he relented. They set out at dawn, riding side by side across the prairie. Cole had taught Grace the basics of working cattle, how to move them where you wanted them to go, how to separate one animal from the herd, how to spot signs of injury or illness. Now, it was time to put that knowledge into practice. The morning was cool and clear, perfect weather for the hard work ahead. The cattle were scattered across the east pasture, grazing peacefully. Cole and Grace worked together to gather them into a tighter group, then began the painstaking process of sorting through them one by one. Cole would point out features Grace should look for: the conformation that marked good breeding stock, the size and weight that meant an animal was ready for market, the subtle signs that might indicate health problems. Grace watched and learned, occasionally asking questions, mostly just absorbing everything like a sponge. By midday, they had sorted out 5 steers that Cole deemed ready to sell. It was not a large number, but it would bring in enough money to cover their expenses for the next few months. Grace felt a fierce satisfaction at having contributed to the work, at having been an actual partner in the process rather than just an observer. They stopped to rest and eat the lunch Grace had packed, sitting in the shade of a lone tree with their horses grazing nearby. Grace's leg was aching from the morning's exertion, but she did not regret it. She felt more alive than she had in months, more purposeful. "You did well today," Cole said, passing her a canteen of water. "Really well. You have good instincts." "I have a good teacher," Grace replied. Their eyes met and held, and she felt that familiar spark of electricity arc between them. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility, and Grace found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she could not name. Cole leaned toward her too, and for a heartbeat Grace thought he was going to kiss her. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. But then a cow lowed nearby, breaking the spell, and Cole pulled back with a slight shake of his head as if clearing it. "We should get back to work," he said, his voice a little rough. "We need to get these steers penned before dark." Grace nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that washed through her. They finished their lunch in silence and returned to work, but the tension between them remained, simmering just below the surface, impossible to ignore. That evening, after they had successfully penned the 5 steers and made plans to drive them to town the next day, Grace stood at her kitchen window and watched Cole walk back to his cabin. She wanted to call out to him, wanted to ask him to stay, wanted to tell him how she felt. But fear held her back. What if she was wrong about his feelings? What if she ruined the comfortable partnership they had built by pushing for something more? She could not afford to lose him, not when she needed him so desperately to make the ranch work. But as the days passed, the tension between them only grew stronger. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their bodies often pressed close as they maneuvered cattle or repaired fences. They shared meals and conversation, learning each other's quirks and habits, becoming friends as well as partners. And underneath, it all ran a current of attraction so strong that Grace sometimes felt like she was drowning in it. It came to a head on a hot afternoon in late June. They had been working since dawn to move the herd to fresh grazing in the north pasture, hard labor under a relentless sun. By mid-afternoon, both of them were soaked with sweat and exhausted. They stopped to rest by the creek that ran through Grace's property, and Cole suggested they cool off in the water. Grace hesitated. She was wearing a simple cotton dress that would become completely transparent if it got wet. But the heat was oppressive, and the cool water looked irresistible. She nodded, and they both waded in, gasping at the shock of cold after the heat of the day. Grace dunked her head under the water and came up laughing, pushing wet hair out of her eyes. When she looked at Cole, she found him staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His wet shirt clung to his chest, revealing the muscular build she had only guessed at before. Water droplets caught in his dark hair and sparkled in the sunlight. He looked beautiful, she thought, and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical threat. "Grace," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her heart skip. He took a step toward her through the water. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she whispered, frozen in place. "I have been trying to keep this professional," Cole said. "I have been trying to remember that you are my employer and I am your hired hand, and that there is a line I should not cross. But Grace, I am failing. I am failing badly, and I do not think I can keep pretending anymore." "Pretending what?" Grace's voice was barely audible over the babble of the creek. "Pretending that I do not have feelings for you," Cole said. He took another step closer, until they were only a foot apart, until Grace could see the droplets of water on his eyelashes. "Pretending that I do not think about you every moment of every day. Pretending that I do not want to kiss you so badly it is driving me half out of my mind." Grace's heart was thundering in her chest. "Then stop pretending," she said. "Stop pretending and kiss me." Cole did not need to be told twice. He closed the distance between them in one stride, his hands coming up to frame her face, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was everything Grace had been dreaming about and more. He kissed her like a man starving, like she was air and water and everything he needed to survive. Grace kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his wet shirt, pulling him closer. They broke apart eventually, both breathing hard. Cole rested his forehead against hers, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I am in love with you, Grace Hartley," he said quietly. "I think I have been since the moment I saw you trapped under that beam, looking at me like I was your last hope. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I cannot help how I feel." "It is not too fast," Grace said, tears pricking her eyes. "It is perfect. Because I am in love with you too, Cole Foster. I am so completely in love with you that I do not know what to do with it." Cole smiled, that brilliant transforming smile she loved so much, and kissed her again. This time it was gentler, sweeter, a promise rather than a demand. When they finally made their way out of the creek and back to the horses, everything had changed. They were no longer employer and hired hand, no longer just friends or partners. They were something more, something deeper, something that felt like it could last forever. That night, Cole asked if he could court her properly, and Grace laughed and said yes, even though they were well past the point where formal courtship seemed necessary. But Cole insisted, said he wanted to do things right, wanted to give her the romance she deserved. So they courted in their own way, stealing kisses between chores, holding hands as they walked across the prairie, sitting close together on the porch in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. Grace had never been happier. The ranch was thriving under their joint management. They had sold the 5 steers for a good price, enough to cover expenses and even save a little. The herd was healthy and growing, with several new calves born over the summer. The house and outbuildings were in good repair, and they had even begun making plans to rebuild the barn come fall, after the harvest. More importantly, Grace had found something she had not even known she was looking for: a true partner, someone who saw her as an equal, who valued her mind as much as her heart. Cole treated her like she was precious, but never fragile. He respected her opinions and deferred to her judgment on ranch matters when appropriate. He made her laugh and challenged her to be better and held her when she needed comfort. He was everything she had never dared to hope for. In late July, on an evening when the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cole asked Grace to marry him. They were sitting on the porch, and he had carved her another wooden horse, this one more detailed and beautiful than the first. He presented it to her with shaking hands, and when she looked closely, she saw that he had carved their initials into the base. "Grace," he said, taking her hands in his, "I know we have not known each other long by most people's standards. But I know my own heart, and I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this ranch together, grow old together, face whatever comes together. Will you marry me?" Grace did not need to think about her answer. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in September, in a small ceremony at the church in Leavenworth. Dr. Morrison gave Grace away, and a few neighbors attended, people who had known the Hartley family for years, and were pleased to see Grace find happiness after so much loss. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk all these years. Cole wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that Grace could barely breathe when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Cole he could kiss his bride, Cole swept Grace into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and laughter of the small gathering. Grace felt like her heart would burst with joy. They held a small reception at the ranch afterward, a celebration with food and music and dancing under the stars. Grace danced with Cole until her feet hurt, laughed until her sides ached, basked in the warmth of being surrounded by people who wished them well. When the last guest had departed and they were finally alone, Cole carried Grace over the threshold of the house that was now officially theirs together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," he said, setting her down gently and kissing her forehead. "It has been my home all along," Grace said. "But it is better now that you are here to share it with me." They made love for the first time that night, tenderly and slowly, learning each other's bodies with the same patience and care they had shown in learning to work together. Grace had been nervous, having never been with a man before, but Cole was gentle and attentive, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, and Grace felt more content than she ever had in her life. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and steady growth. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They rebuilt the barn, bigger and better than the original. They increased their herd to over 100 head, just as Cole had predicted. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from town who were eager to learn. Grace became known throughout the county as a savvy businesswoman, someone who could negotiate prices and contracts as well as any man. Cole was respected for his skill with horses and cattle, and sought after for advice by other ranchers. But more than the professional success, what mattered to Grace was the life they built together. She and Cole were true partners in every sense, sharing the burdens and the joys equally. They made decisions together, supported each other through difficulties, celebrated each other's triumphs. They laughed together every single day, even when times were tough. They grew together, learned together, built something lasting and true. In the spring of 1883, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Cole, worried about how a baby would change their dynamic, worried about whether she could balance motherhood with the demands of the ranch. But when she finally told him, Cole's face lit up with such pure joy that all her fears melted away. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Grace, we are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace was sick for the first few months, and as she grew larger, she found it increasingly difficult to do the physical work she was accustomed to. It frustrated her terribly to have to step back and let others handle tasks she had always done herself. But Cole was endlessly patient, taking on extra work without complaint, making sure Grace rested and ate properly, rubbing her aching back at the end of long days. Their son was born on a cold November night in 1883, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Cole stayed with Grace throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Cole cut the cord with shaking hands and then held his son for the first time with an expression of such awe and tenderness that Grace fell in love with him all over again. They named the baby Charles, after Cole's father, and called him Charlie. He was a beautiful baby, with Cole's dark hair and Grace's green eyes, and he transformed their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. Grace had worried that motherhood would feel like a trap, would force her to give up the work and independence she valued. But instead, she found that it added a new dimension to her life, a new source of joy and purpose. She loved being a mother, loved watching Charlie grow and learn, loved seeing Cole interact with their son with such gentle patience. Cole was a wonderful father, involved and attentive in a way that many men of their era were not. He changed diapers and walked the floor with Charlie when he was fussy and sang lullabies in his deep, slightly off-key voice. As Charlie grew, Cole began teaching him about the ranch, carrying him around on his shoulders as he did the chores, explaining everything in simple terms the little boy could understand. Grace managed to balance motherhood and ranch work by sheer determination and careful organization. She kept Charlie with her as much as possible, carrying him in a sling as she went about her tasks, setting him down to play in the shade while she worked. As he got older and more mobile, she taught him to stay close and be safe around the animals. It was exhausting, but it was also deeply fulfilling. She was building a legacy, something to pass down to her son and whatever other children might come. 2 years after Charlie's birth, Grace became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine, was born in the summer of 1886. She was quieter than Charlie had been, more observant with Cole's blue eyes and a serious little face that made everyone smile. With 2 children and a growing ranch, life was busier than ever. Grace and Cole hired additional help, including a young woman from town named Mary who came in several times a week to help with the housework and the children. This freed Grace to continue being involved in the business side of the ranch, which she loved. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1888, they had expanded their land holdings, purchasing an adjacent quarter section from a neighbor who was retiring. Their herd had grown to nearly 200 head, and they were making a comfortable living. They had paid off all their debts and even had money saved. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a new wing added for the children's bedrooms. But more than the material success, what mattered to Grace was the family they had created. She and Cole were more in love than ever, their bond deepened by years of facing challenges together and building a life from nothing. Their children were healthy and happy, growing up with the security of knowing they were loved and valued. The ranch was not just a business anymore. It was a home, a place where their family could grow and flourish. There were hard times too, of course. Droughts that dried up the water sources and forced them to drill new wells. Harsh winters that killed off livestock and left them struggling to feed the remaining animals. Market fluctuations that made it hard to get good prices for their cattle. But they faced every challenge together, never losing faith in each other or in their ability to overcome whatever obstacles arose. In 1890, when Grace was 29 and Cole was 31, they welcomed their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas after Grace's late brother. Grace had thought long and hard about whether to use that name, worried that it might bring back painful memories. But Cole encouraged her, saying it was a way to honor her brother and keep his memory alive. And he was right. Naming their son Thomas felt like healing, like closing a circle that had been left open. By the time Thomas was born, Charlie was 7 and already showing signs of being a natural rancher like his father. He spent every moment he could with Cole, learning to rope and ride and care for the animals. Catherine was 4, quieter but equally interested in the ranch. She liked to help Grace with the chickens and the garden, and she had a gentle way with the horses that suggested she would be a fine rider someday. Grace sometimes thought back to that day in the burning barn, to the moment when she had been certain she was going to die. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. That Grace had been alone and frightened and convinced she had nothing left to live for. This Grace was surrounded by love, was building something meaningful, was living a life richer than she had ever imagined possible. And it had all started because Cole Foster had seen smoke on the horizon and decided to investigate. Because he had been strong enough to lift a beam that should have been impossible to move. Because he had looked at her lying there in the ruins of her barn and asked not just what was broken in her body, but what was broken in her life, and then had dedicated himself to helping her heal all of it. On their 10th wedding anniversary in September 1891, Cole gave Grace a framed copy of the wooden horse he had carved for her all those years ago, the one with their initials on the base. Beside it, he had added a carving of their family, Grace and Cole and Charlie and Catherine and little Thomas, all standing together in front of a miniature version of their ranch house. "This is what you have given me," he said as Grace unwrapped the gift with tears in her eyes. "A family, a home, a reason to stay in one place and build something that lasts. You have given me everything, Grace." "We gave it to each other," Grace said, kissing him softly. "I was lost when you found me, broken in more ways than just physically. You put me back together. You showed me I was strong enough to hold on to what mattered. You loved me when I had nothing to offer but a failing ranch and a lot of hope. You had everything to offer, Cole said. Your strength, your intelligence, your courage, your heart. I fell in love with all of it, and I fall in love with you more every single day. They held each other close, surrounded by the sounds of their children playing in the next room, by the familiar creaks of the house they had built together, by the endless prairie wind that whispered across the land they had claimed as their own. Grace thought about everything they had survived, everything they had built, everything they still had ahead of them. There would be more challenges, she knew. More hard times, more losses, more moments when it would seem easier to give up than keep fighting. But they would face it all together, just as they always had. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s. Charlie grew into a capable young man who shared his father's passion for ranching and his mother's head for business. Catherine developed into a skilled horsewoman who could ride as well as any of the ranch hands. Thomas was still young but showed every sign of being as stubborn and determined as his mother. Grace and Cole occasionally talked about having more children, but 3 felt like the right number for their family. In 1895, when Charlie was 12, he started talking about wanting to attend agricultural college, a new program that had been established in Kansas to teach scientific farming and ranching methods. Grace and Cole were supportive of his ambition and began saving money for his education. Catherine, at 9, had announced that she wanted to be a veterinarian, inspired by old Dr. Morrison, who still practiced in Leavenworth despite his advancing age. Grace encouraged her daughter's dreams, even though she knew it would be difficult for a woman to break into such a male-dominated field. But if anyone could do it, Grace believed it would be her fierce, determined Catherine. The ranch itself had become one of the most successful operations in the county. They ran 300 head of cattle now, and their breeding program was producing some of the finest Hereford stock in Kansas. Other ranchers came to them for advice and to purchase breeding bulls. Grace's reputation as a businesswoman had only grown over the years, and she served on several committees in Leavenworth related to agriculture and land management. But despite their success and their busy lives, Grace and Cole always made time for each other. Every Sunday, no matter how much work there was to do, they took the day off to be with their family. They would attend church in the morning, then come home for a big family dinner. In the afternoons, they would often go for a ride, just the 2 of them, leaving the children in Mary's care for a few hours. These rides were precious to both of them, a chance to reconnect and remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. On one such ride in the fall of 1896, Cole and Grace stopped at the creek where he had first kissed her all those years ago. The trees had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the water sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. They dismounted and stood together on the bank, Cole's arm around Grace's waist, both of them lost in memory. "You remember when I told you what else was broken?" Grace asked quietly. "That first day when you asked me." "I remember," Cole said. "You said everything, maybe." Grace nodded. "I felt that way. I felt completely shattered, like there was no point in even trying to put the pieces back together. But you saw something in me that I could not see in myself. You saw that I was worth saving." "You were always worth saving," Cole said. "You just needed someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself again." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I am grateful every single day that I saw that smoke, that I turned around, that I found you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Foster." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Grace said. "You saved my life that day, but more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and partnership and a family and a future. You gave me everything." They kissed there by the creek, a long, slow kiss that held 15 years of love and partnership, and shared struggle and triumph. When they finally pulled apart, Grace rested her head on Cole's shoulder and looked out across the prairie that had been her home for her entire life. This land had seen so much: her father's dreams, her brother's death, her own desperation and rebirth. It had tested her, challenged her, nearly broken her, but it had also given her everything she held most dear. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, his voice soft. "I am thinking about legacy," Grace said. "About what we are leaving behind for our children. This ranch, yes, but more than that. We are showing them what real partnership looks like, what it means to work together toward a common goal. We are teaching them that strength comes in many forms, that courage is not the absence of fear but the willingness to keep going despite it. We are giving them roots and wings both." "That is all any parent can hope to do," Cole said, "and I think we are doing a pretty good job of it." They rode back to the ranch house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in those brilliant colors that only seemed to exist in Kansas. Their children were waiting on the porch, Charlie helping Thomas feed the chickens while Catherine read a book in the fading light. They looked up as their parents approached, and Grace felt her heart swell with love so intense it almost hurt. This was her life now. This beautiful, messy, challenging, wonderful life that had grown from the ashes of that burning barn. This family, this ranch, this man who had seen her at her lowest moment and decided she was worth saving. Everything had changed that day when Cole lifted the beam off her legs. He had freed her body, yes, but he had also freed her heart, her spirit, her ability to hope and dream and believe in herself. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. In 1898, Charlie left for agricultural college, the first member of their family to pursue higher education. It was bittersweet for Grace to watch her oldest child leave home, but she was proud of his ambition and excited to see what he would accomplish. Catherine continued to pursue her dream of becoming a veterinarian, reading every book she could find on animal medicine, and assisting Dr. Morrison whenever he would allow it. Thomas grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy who loved the ranch and the animals with the same passion his father had shown. In 1900, as the new century began, Grace and Cole celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. They threw a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends and business associates from all over the county. It was a joyous celebration, filled with food and music and dancing. During a quiet moment, Cole pulled Grace aside and led her to the newly rebuilt barn, the one that had replaced the structure where they first met. "I have something to show you," he said, his eyes twinkling with a secret. He led her inside to one of the support beams, and Grace saw that he had carved something into the wood. It was their story, told in simple words and images. A beam, a fire, two figures, a house, a family. At the bottom, he had written, "Here is where our story began, may it never end." Grace traced the carving with her fingers, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect." "Far from it," Cole said, pulling her into his arms. "But I am perfect for you and you are perfect for me, and that is all that matters." They stood together in the barn, holding each other close, and Grace thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The pain and loss that had nearly destroyed her. The courage it had taken to accept help when she desperately needed it. The slow building of trust and partnership and love. The life they had created together, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. "What else is broken here?" Cole had asked her that day, and Grace had answered honestly, "Everything, maybe." But together they had fixed it all. They had taken what was broken and made it whole. They had built something beautiful from the ruins. Charlie graduated from agricultural college in 1901, and came home to the ranch with new ideas and techniques that helped them improve their operation even further. He had grown into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's sharp mind and business sense. He began courting a young woman from Leavenworth, and Grace could already see a wedding in their future. Catherine, at 15, was more determined than ever to become a veterinarian. She had been accepted into a program at a women's college in the East that would allow her to pursue her medical studies. It meant she would be far from home, but Grace and Cole supported her dream, even though it was hard to think about letting their daughter go. Thomas, at 11, was already talking about taking over the ranch someday, about continuing the legacy his parents had built. He followed Cole everywhere, absorbed every lesson, showed a natural aptitude for the work that made Cole beam with pride. As Grace watched her children grow and pursue their own dreams, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She and Cole had not just built a successful ranch. They had raised good humans, people,